good evening. I'm Melisa, Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day. Let's begin with news that Datin Seri Rosmah Mansor failed to turn up for the first day of her corruption trial at the KL High Court this afternoon. Now, this trial is in relation to a solar project for schools in Sarawak, and Rosmah is accused of soliciting and accepting about 187 million ringgit. This to ensure a company from Bintulu that allegedly rented out cars won a contract to install and maintain solar power systems at 369 schools in Sarawak. So Rosmah gave an MC, and that MC was issued by the KPJ Ampang Putri Specialist Hospital, which had referenced her previous visits for severe recurrent neck pain. So there you go. She's got a medical certificate to get out of trial.
Oh, yeah, but only for a short while, Melisa. There's several things in the mix that, and I think you pointed out very clearly that this is a corruption trial that deals with schools. Allocations for schools and for rural schools. The poorest of the poor, the most disadvantaged of Malaysians, subject to potentially or allegedly corruption that would have diminished their chances, right? So resources that would have gone otherwise to the schools now taken as a cut. Now, the facts of this case aside, Melisa, not prejudging it, the issue really is before us is the nature of corruption. I'm hoping that the trial of Rosmah Mansor, the trial of Najib Razak, the trial of all those individuals that the MACC is now catching will give us a greater insight into the nature of corruption in this country. What are the enablers?
Right. And
who has suffered most as a consequence of corruption in this country?
Well, one of the things that struck me the most about the charges in this case is that, again, this 187 million ringgit in a bribes for contract scandal. Just it struck me because this is to do with the Education Ministry. And I was wondering how much influence the wife of the Prime Minister would have over contracts within the Education Ministry. That was one of the lingering questions I have, and I will be watching this trial quite closely.
Yeah, and I think, of course, we looked at the media to focus on the important issues. I know there's a lot of hay to be made. Quite a number of jokes that will be passed around coffee tables and a lunchtime conversation around the kinds of excuses, the repartee between the lawyers and all that. But that's actually not the heart of the problem. Right? The heart of the problem is corruption in this country, and people in very high places abusing their power to enrich themselves.
Understanding how it works and how we can stop it. All right, well, let's move on now to news of a 38-year-old disabled man who yesterday was sentenced to 6 months in prison by the Magistrates Court in Kuala Terengganu. This for his attempt on suicide on the 23rd of December. So two rights groups, Lawyers for Liberty and Hakam, have called on the Attorney General to review the sentence because I think it was interesting about the case. Several points to note here is that first, the man had pleaded guilty, but he was not represented by a lawyer. Second, the prosecution was conducted by a senior police officer instead of a deputy public prosecutor. And thirdly, the report said the man was depressed. So we have to really look at the country's move towards decriminalizing suicide.
Yeah, there's that. There's also a very interesting fact. When we look back at the Rosmah Mansor case, Melisa, there's the judge expressed some generosity in terms of this person now who's in the dock giving her space to people get ill and so on and so forth. But I don't know how much generosity is afforded to the working class who find themselves, individuals who find themselves in the dock and trial for all kinds of issues, right?
Yeah.
How much generosity does our legal system give to them as opposed to the high rollers and high flyers of this country? I think that's one. The other thing, of course, is, and you're right about the decriminalizing aspect of this issue, which is that, Melisa, why is it that suicide in the first place is a criminal act? How did it become criminal to take your own life?
Well,
Not to take the life of others, but your own life.
I think this is an archaic law, and I think Malaysia is one of the few countries still retaining this archaic law in our statute books. I have something to do about preserving the sanctity of life, doing no harm, and I think it comes from that train of thought. But just to follow on to that discussion about decriminalising attempted suicide, the government is committed to this. Apparently, the de facto law minister, Datuk Liew Vu Kong, said that the government is working to table the amendments to the penal code by mid this year. So we are looking at perhaps decriminalising suicide and, in fact, approaching suicide not as a crime, but rather a mental health problem.
Yeah. So the question, that you might ask, have read this article in the newspaper, is did the presiding judge, have the opportunity to not hand down a custodial sentence? Could the judge have, in fact, sent the person off for psychiatric evaluation and dealt with it that way?
Yeah.
I mean, were the hands of the judge tied, or was the judge animated or by some other notion? Did he or she think that what they were doing was in fact the right way to go about to deal with somebody who had attempted suicide?
Good point. Could be the letter of the law. Now, I have to point out that, talking about this story, that if you are lonely, distressed, or having negative thoughts, Befrienders offers free and confidential support 24 hours a day. We're going to flash the number on the screen. Please contact them at the number on the screen if you are feeling distressed and you need someone to talk to. All right, so in other news, let's take a look now at the latest on the coronavirus. So far, 362 people have died from the novel coronavirus as of Monday, February 3rd. So the death in the Philippines, which was reported yesterday, marks the first death from the virus outside of China. The patient was a 44-year-old man from Wuhan who died 8 days after being admitted to the hospital. So far, there are currently about 17,500 confirmed cases in 27 countries.
Yeah, and I think, Melisa, with all these numbers, one has to step back and take a comparative perspective, right? So look at the avian flu, look at all these other outbreaks that have gone global, and look at infection rates, the number of people affected, mortality rates, and then maybe we come to a much more considered position on how bad this situation is. Now, yes, everybody's concerned, but I think panic as often is the worst response to this.
Completely agree.
Yeah, we all know that you wear a mask not when you're well, you wear a mask only if you're sick because you don't want to transmit. Wearing a mask does not, in fact, have a prophylactic quality. It doesn't protect you from catching the disease. So why wear a mask? If you
don't have flu-like symptoms, don't wear a mask. In fact, what you should be doing, more importantly, is making sure you wash your hands regularly with soap. I also want to just make a note here that the number of novel coronaviruses confirmed cases here in Malaysia has stayed at 8 since Thursday, and I think that's a good sign. And apparently, our neighbours in Thailand have had some apparent success in treatment with an antiviral drug cocktail. So a 71-year-old patient had tested negative for the virus 48 hours after doctors administered a combination of antivirals which were used to treat the flu as well as HIV. So perhaps that's some positive news coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. Well, yeah, there you go, the PHICE. Okay, after this, we're going to take a closer look at the possibility of a PPSMI revival. Stay tuned to consider this.